Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy to have with us Ryan Gregerson. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks, Zane. Appreciate it.
So, Ryan built a family law department from zero to the largest in a major Utah firm. And then he walked away to sell LegalTech. But in December 2022, he decided he'd come back to law and launched RCG Law Group, which now has 10 attorneys and over 3,000 clients served and a national ABA leadership role in under 3 years. Pretty impressive stuff. So you spent over a decade building a family law practice at someone else's firm and then left law completely to sell software and then came back to start your own shop. What happened? How did that all happen? Because that's quite a change and then quite a change back.
Yeah, when I had been building that department at the prior firm that I was at, I started there as their very first associate hire. In fact, there was only 4 attorneys at the time, and I did become a partner and help to build that. By the time I left, I think we were 35 attorneys by the time I left. But I had the desire to do something different. By the time I left, I think we had 15 partners, I believe is what it was. And I thought I wanted to try my hand at, leadership in a different organization, maybe in the tech world. So I joined a tech company with the designs of like, okay, I'll start in whatever role they'll give me. And we'll kind of see if I can find my way to, move up in an organization to earn additional responsibilities. And so they'd hired me on. But as I did that, as I'm selling this legal technology to lawyers, I just had this itch of like, why do I not just start my own law firm? Like, why am I doing something with somebody else when I've got a license and all I got to do is just open up shop? So I was only there for about 10 months and decided to open up my own law firm and just kind of build it from scratch. So I didn't have any clients to start with because leaving the profession, then coming back, I didn't have a bunch of clients that I could simply bring with. And so it was a challenge. It was a challenge to say like, okay, well, let's do this. Let's get a little executive suite. It's just a room. My wife was, my office manager and helper. And we just started building based on principles, though, that I'd learned at the prior law firm, based on some things I'd learned at that tech company that I was at, to try to find like a real solid foundation to build from, so I could hopefully do it, relatively quickly.
So what did that? You start up from nothing. How did you get your first client?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that I did have the advantage of coming from the law firm that I was at, I needed to bring in all my old clients into the new software that I have for conflicts check purposes, but also, to let them know. I had the ability to advise all old clients that I was now opening up my own shop, and so I did that. I send out a blast, a drip campaign to all these old clients to let them know, but also having operated in leadership at the prior firm, I also had a pretty good idea of what types of companies I could use for website, for advertising, like, Google pay-per-click, local service ads, those types of things. I had been part of the process of vetting through different vendors. And so I already knew who I wanted to use. I knew the software I wanted to use. I knew the website company I wanted to use. And so I had some savings and quickly, jumped on board with getting my website up and running, getting some advertising going, and then also drawing on some of these old clients. And in fact, the very first client that I had with a new law firm was an old client that I had that needed a modification. I do family law, and when you have family law cases, oftentimes there's need for enforcements or modifications of pre-existing decrees. And sure enough, that was the way that I got the very first one, was an old client.
So when people think of family law, I'm usually thinking of some sort of a dissolution, but it's more than that, isn't it? So tell me, typically, are most of your clients at some sort of a dissolution stage, or what other things do you do directly with family law? What's your firm, the totality of what you guys do there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and interestingly enough, anecdotally, I've got a number of friends that also do family law here in the state of Utah where I practice. And I was talking with one of them a number of years ago, and somehow we got on the topic of how we introduce ourselves to other people, like when we're just out networking or with new people we meet. And I told him that I always say I'm a family law attorney. He's like, well, I mean, how much other practice areas do you do besides divorce or dissolution? I was like, well, it's, 90% divorce. He's like, just introduce yourself as a divorce attorney. And I was like, okay. He's like, for some reason, as family law attorneys, we have this aversion to saying we're a divorce attorney. He's like, just own it and just say it. And so the vast majority of what we do is divorce. It's 90%. Certainly custody cases as well, where somebody wasn't married, but now they're breaking up. So it's very similar to the way that a divorce process works. We do some guardianship, some adoptions, do a little bit of surrogacy. My wife and I actually had our own surrogacy that we did a number of years ago. So got a little bit familiar with that process. So we've been able to help some clients through the surrogacy process as well. So family law is a lot of things, but the vast majority is divorce or dissolution.
Okay. Well, I understand why, you know, because divorce is such a negative thing,
It is.
and
It
it's
so is.
difficult.
Yeah.
And so, how do you? So this is just totally. I'm just curious. How do you handle? I talked to a lot of attorneys of all different stripes, but it just occurred to me as I'm talking here to you. You seem like a very positive sort of person. How do you stay positive in the light of what it is that you do? So there's so much conflict, and how do you bring a positive presence to that to keep your clients kind of positive about what's going on in their life? Maybe not positive, but at least being able to, to weather the storm. The emotional side of it.
Yeah. Zane, it's such a great question. It's something that I talk with a lot of people about, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And really, it comes back to having an overall purpose in what you do. I talk a lot about Simon Sinek. And if you're familiar with him, you'll know what I'm talking about. If your listeners do, they will. If not, it's the idea of a why. A number of years ago, he did a TED Talk where he talked about great organizations separate themselves by having a real purpose or a why in mind. What's the greater purpose for them existing? And so, what was really important for me when I was developing the family law practice in my last firm, and then as the foundation for my firm, was to have a really solid why. Why do I do this? Why do we want to help clients? What's the whole purpose of it? And our why is to inspire others to transcend their trials and build their best life. So when we look at it through that lens of what we have the opportunity to do with our divorce clients, with our custody clients, with somebody going through a really hard trial, if we can help to inspire them, educate them, guide them through this really difficult chapter of their life, then we also have the ability to help them build for a better future, to help them build for the next phase of their life, because divorce is really hard. Nobody gets married wanting to get divorced. And so when it's this really difficult chapter you're going through, if you can take that approach, like this is an opportunity to help this person. This is an opportunity to educate them about, well, how do you co-parent now that you're dealing with this difficult situation? How do you take a step back and realize that emotions are driving a lot of this as opposed to the practical realities of it? Part of that is building the relationship with your client, hearing them, empathizing with them, and then providing those tools and those resources, providing the education for how those things should work. My opinion is that the vast majority of divorces should never go to trial, because going to trial, especially if there's kids, you almost guarantee that you're going to have a very difficult co-parenting relationship. Some cases have to. You don't have a choice. I've certainly done plenty of trials in my day in the last 15, 16 years. But if we can avoid it, if we can help the parties come to a reasonable agreement so they can maintain some semblance of an effective co-parenting relationship, we know, statistically speaking, the studies show that it will be better for kids. It just will. So when we think about what our purpose is of transcending those trials, helping the clients transcend those trials, part of it is people want their kids to be okay. And
Right.
sometimes they don't understand what that's going to look like, because this new divorce thing and, having time being taken away from them with their kids. But if we can educate them about the impact of how this co-parenting relationship will shape the future of their children's lives, now suddenly people start to see it through a different lens. And so it just kind of comes back to this idea of having a greater purpose in mind for why we practice. And then that makes it easier to persevere through clients that can be very difficult. Although what I also say a lot is that opposing counsel is actually what makes my life more difficult as opposed to my client and opposing parties. Sometimes opposing counsel can just be really difficult to work with, take things way too personal. But again, if we can understand the purpose, it makes it easier to navigate those situations.
So, sometimes I hear that it's the friends and family of the spouses that can sometimes make these situations much worse because they're saying, no, you need to get every pound of flesh that you could possibly get. You need to go to court. You need to do this. You need to do that. You have to protect yourself. And they're pushing them to do, even though they're kind of tertiary. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. It does frequently happen. And so in those situations, there's times where I'm going to invite those people to join us in a meeting or on a call so that they can understand a little bit more about the reasons we're taking the strategy that we are. But it also then just takes constant reinforcement with your client about what the strategy is, what the game plan is for their case, what your legal advice is, and then circling back to it and being patient with them, understanding like this person is going through something so hard. So of course they're looking to their confidants, right? Their closest friends, their closest family, and not just dismissing that that's something that's important to them, acknowledging like, hey, that person really does care about you. Like clearly that person cares about you. Here's my perspective. Here's how that could negatively affect the future of your life or your children's life, even though they're trying to give you the good advice, even though they're trying to do the right thing. And so, acknowledging that they're going to have a perspective, acknowledging that they do want to take advice from people, but kind of redirecting that in the right way, I think is sometimes a really effective tool to use.
Do you sometimes feel like you're part counselor and part attorney?
No question, no question. I do sometimes have to tell my clients that like, hey, you know what, you certainly, I can continue talking to you about certain things, but I might be a little bit more expensive than a therapist. And so I'm happy to provide some names of some great therapists who could talk through some of these things for you. Not that I don't want to, or not that I'm not willing to provide you the legal advice, but a lot of clients could probably use a therapist, a trained professional on those things. But there's definitely times where we're kind of bridging the gap a little bit there, where we're having to do a little bit more of that, counselor at law type of a role because they need it.
Yeah. So you've gone from 0 to 10 attorneys, over 3,000 clients in about 3 years. What do you think, or what is driving that kind of growth? That's pretty impressive.
For me, it actually circles right back to what we just talked about, which is the purpose and the why. Because when that is the foundation of our organization, then people want to work here because they harmonize with that purpose, for them in their lives. And then the same thing with clients. What Simon Sinek says is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so when we have that as the foundation here, then clients want to do work with us because of what we can bring to the table that's a little bit different than some other law firms. When somebody just wants to hire a bulldog, we're not the firm for them. And I would submit that most people actually don't truly want a bulldog. They don't really want to just go and take advantage of their side in every which way that they can. Most people are good people and might be a little bit misguided at times and need redirection. But I think it's because of that purpose. People that work here, people that want to do work with us, that want to hire us because they understand the greater purpose that we're trying to serve.
So your firm connects divorcing clients with therapists, financial planners, real estate agents. How did you land on that holistic model, and how does that actually work in real practice?
Yeah, I mean, we actually started doing it at my last firm, and I'll give certainly some credit to the managing partner at that firm. That was just something that was really important to him in his practice area. He did mostly estate planning, but it was always important for him to connect his clients with CPAs that they might need or financial planners that they might need. And so as he was kind of helping me to build what family law was, it was just a very natural, like, oh, okay, well, if we're thinking about more things that the client needs, well, yeah, certainly there's lots of stuff that I can see that a divorcing client would need. And so it started developing that way. So the way that in practical application we do it is the very beginning of the case, we do what we call a divorce strategy and protection plan. And we have a meeting within the first 48 hours with a client where we go over what the strategy is for the case. And then we identify what professionals they might need during the case. Do they need to get a CPA because they're behind on some taxes and they need to get that stuff cleaned up? Do they need to get a real estate agent so they can get a quick, comparative market analysis to understand what are the possibilities with this house? Do we need to get them connected with a mortgage officer because they want to keep the house, but now they're not going to have two-income household? What's their credit score? Are they going to qualify? Do they need to repair it? And so we try to identify those right up front. And then at the very end of the case, once the decree is signed, we do what we call a next steps meeting where we say, okay, we had certain professionals involved throughout the case. Now, what do you need now the case is done? Oh, you actually have to go and refinance that house. Well, let's make sure you're connected right back to that same loan officer so you can go do that within the time frame the decree requires you to. Or, hey, now you've got this new retirement account that you just got because you got half the retirement account from your spouse. Well, what do you do with it now? Okay, well, let's get you connected with a financial planner so they can help you make savvy investments in what you're going to do with this retirement account now that you have it. So we take the opportunity at the end as well to do that same thing and connect them with those professionals, knowing now what their new circumstance is.
What if you have a spouse that maybe doesn't really isn't familiar with their financial picture at all? Maybe they're in a relationship where it's very controlling. I'm sure you've seen this, and the spouse just is like a lamb to slaughter almost, and you're like stepping in there and you're going, um, eh, it's hard to be, well, you're definitely not impartial, but how do you help somebody navigate through those kinds of waters where they don't even know where their money is? They don't know how much money they have. They don't know what, what is going on. How do you help navigate that really very personal kind of, but it's personal and financial?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the advantages we have in attempting to do that is that both sides are required in a divorce case to provide, disclosures for the finances. Each state calls it something slightly different. In Utah, we call it a financial declaration. And it also has certain required documents that have to be filed. So even if my client doesn't have access to those or know those, we know that within the first very short time frame, in Utah, it's within 14 days of an answer being filed, all of that has to be provided. So even if my client didn't have it, the other side's having to give it. Now I can receive all of that information, and then we can go through it with our client to say, okay, you didn't know what it was, but here's what we have. We have these accounts, we have these retirements, we have these debts. Here's what the income is for the other side. Here is the landscape of what we're looking at. Now let's start going over what this could look like in the ultimate division that's going to happen. Here's what the possibilities are. And in Utah as well, in any contested divorce case, you're required to do mediation. And so mediation is a wonderful opportunity for us to have already received those disclosures, then go through again with our client to say, okay, what is the ideal outcome in this mediation? What is it that you'd like? What are the things that are important to you when it comes to these finances? And how could this division work? What could it look like? We utilize a spreadsheet to lay out all of the debts and assets and to make sure we understand with the client exactly where they might be going and how that's going to impact them and what they're doing. For really complicated cases, I've brought in other professionals like a forensic accountant or a financial planner that can help them plan out on which resources they should be taking. Because we've represented all sorts of people. We've represented, biotech CEOs to, people that are professional athletes, to other folks that have a lot of really complicated finances. And so sometimes it takes a forensic accountant to give that same kind of breakdown because they are so complicated sometimes.
So is Utah a community property state?
We are not community property. No, it's equitable division is the way that we call it. Though in practical application, a lot of times it comes out to be the same as community property might. But there are some nuances and differences of equitable division versus community property.
Okay, that's probably a very complex conversation to have, more
Indeed, it
so
is.
than
Yeah,
we
it
have
gets in
enough
the nitty
time
gritty
here.
for sure.
So most family practitioner, family law practitioners in Utah are solo practitioners. So what's the argument for building a team instead of being a solo practitioner?
I mean, it's an excellent question. A lot of people have asked me why I decided to do that instead of just staying on my own. And for me, honestly, it's because I like people. I like to collaborate. I part of what I did when I created our why statement was it was an application both for our external clients, which are our divorce clients, but also for what I was anticipating being our internal clients, which is the people that work for us and work with us. And for me, it's just as important to help my employees here, overcome trials they have to build the best life that they want to have, to take their incomes to new heights and to new levels, and so that they can start experiencing the life they want to have with them and with their families. And so I get a lot of personal satisfaction in being able to help our employees do those things. And so part of why I wanted to build a team is because I want to participate and help them in building careers. And as I also wanted to build a firm that was going to grow and be bigger, I also felt like if we're doing things different and doing things the right way, then we can impact more people. We can impact our employees, but it can also impact far more clients if we're doing things what we deem to be in a way that is different and a little bit better than maybe some other firms are doing. And so more positive impact on more people means, a better community that we're in. It means, more kids that are going to hopefully be raised in homes where there can be a little bit more effective co-parenting than if we didn't.
So, without naming anybody,
Yeah.
was there a case that changed the way you think about divorce, either positively or negatively?
Um, I would say there's definitely been some different cases that have changed my approach. A couple come to mind. I'll share them with you quickly. One is that I always share when it comes to people talking about like, well, don't people get really petty in divorces? And the answer is yes, of course they do sometimes. I had a particular case where we were mediating the case. There was no kids. It was just asset and debt division. And we've been mediating all day. And it was down to the very last thing that we were trying to divide when it came to personal property items. And it was three used bar stools that were in the basement of these folks' home. They weren't antiques. There was no, heirloom value to them at all. They just happened to be bar stools. And for some reason, both of these parties put all of the culmination of the difficulty in the case and the emotions to it in these bar stools. And it was like we were mediating for about an hour over just these bar stools. I finally went to my client. I said, look, these bar stools aren't worth much. We've admitted that, $50, $75 maybe combined for them all. Look, I will write off 2 hours of my time in this mediation if we can just agree that the other side takes these bar stools so that we can be done, because you're paying me, you're paying the mediator, their side's paying their attorney, half the mediator. And we finally agreed. And yet the next day, my client sent me a very upset email that she couldn't believe that I let her give away those bar stools. And it educated me that like there's a lot to it. There's a lot that goes into the emotions, and that even though it seems silly to somebody from the outside, like why the bar stools, it just was, it was the emotional impact of that happened to be where my client ended up. And what it did is it informed me in the future of like having those conversations more with my clients in advance. Like, okay, look, there are going to be things that we're going to have to give away. They're going to feel really hard emotionally. Let's talk about them. Let's deal with them. But let's also know that like both parties are going to feel like their arm was twisted a little bit to come to an agreement. And so that certainly was one of them. And another was really just understanding that these things are real. I had a case where I helped a gentleman with a divorce, and we did a couple of modifications because that sometimes happens in divorces, and it was really hard for him, and so it started to cause him some problems too with his current spouse because he'd gotten remarried, and unfortunately, it got to the point where he actually ended up taking his own life, and it was, hey, this is real life. These things are not they're not written in a book. They're not made up stories. These are real people's lives dealing with real things, and we can't always control the outcome. It was a really hard thing to deal with, but it also was just a reminder of how real it is, how real emotions are, that this is really important work that we're doing that does affect people's lives, and why it's important to help our clients feel heard and seen, to educate them. Ultimately, they are going to make their own choices. Ultimately, that I can't carry the weight or the burden of that, but that this is important work we're doing.
So I can tell you're a very compassionate person, and I saw on when I was reading some of the stuff that you actually followed through with people after the matter was settled. What uh, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
I mean, part of that is what I'd referenced before, which is this next steps meeting we do. So once the decree is signed, we set up this meeting to have with the client to make sure that they understand what all of their obligations are. Because what will usually happen in most cases is you go to mediation, you come to an agreement, but then you have to write up all the final documents, and they got to wait for the judge to sign it. And so that doesn't sometimes happen for a few weeks or a month or two. And so sometimes when I'm doing this next steps meeting with the client, it's been 2 months since the mediation happened. And mediation's a whirlwind, right? Oftentimes you're mediating all day, you come to an agreement finally. The client sometimes doesn't even remember what's in there. And so what I had found before was my clients would sometimes come back 6 months or 12 months later, and they'd had some dispute with their ex, and my client was dead wrong. I'm like, no, 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 that's not what the decree says. They're like, wait, what? And so what I realized was a little bit of time after the decree is signed, a half an hour meeting with the client just to reinforce some of their obligations, but also give them some additional information on how certain things work with custody that we see being common pitfalls. Really, once I started doing that, it helped my clients to avoid some of these problems they were running into in the future. One of the most common ones in the state of Utah is the way that weekends interact with holidays. It's just this really common thing that people will almost always run into a problem if they don't understand it, because the way that holidays work is it overrides the standard parent time. So you might have the occasion where a parent gets 3 weekends in a row because they have their weekend, and then they get the Monday holiday overriding the other parent's weekend, and then they get their other one that they normally would have had. So 3 in a row. And clients don't understand that if you don't explain it. And so I get clients all the time coming back saying like, oh, he's getting 3 weekends in a row. It's so wrong. What's going on? Like, no, no, actually, unfortunately for you, that's the way it works. It'll work in reverse in the future. There'll be times where you have a 3-day weekend that's a Monday holiday, and you'll end up getting 3 in a row. When I explain that after the decree is signed, so they anticipate it, they know it's coming, then either they don't get in dispute because they know it's going to come, or they negotiate, right? Like I tell my clients too. Sometimes I'll tell them that this is what I do with my ex. When we have a potential 3 weekend in a row, my ex and I will actually make a little trade, so we end up having 2 and 2. So we actually don't miss out on it because that's just what we've decided. And we knew it could be a problem. So we've anticipated it, we've negotiated. Now we don't have any fights about that. So I'll tell my clients too, hey, this is something I personally do sometimes. So this is something that you can avoid if you know it's an issue, if you can anticipate in advance, and then you can have that conversation with your ex.
So high asset divorces are kind of a different animal. What's the most surprising thing that people don't realize about splitting significant wealth?
I think what sometimes is difficult is when there's significant wealth, there's different tax treatment that goes into effect with the things that are there, but also contingent interests. I've dealt with a number of cases where you've got all these different stock grants, right? It's preferred stock, or it's contingent upon future performance, or it's got special treatment in the way that it is because it's a new startup company and it's a founder. And so when you have all these different types of assets that are coming into play, it's not as simple as just dividing everything down the middle because of the way that the tax treatment could be, or contingent interest. And so when it comes to those types of things, if you're not careful, then somebody can really get the raw end of the deal when it comes to dividing those assets. And oftentimes that would be the person who it's not their assets. If one particular spouse is one who's involved in that company, they probably understand the nature of these, different stock grants and assets that are there, and the other spouse probably doesn't. And again, if they just kind of idly let it go by, like, oh, okay, yeah, it seems like it's about fair, we're dividing it, it could represent the difference of, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars swing one way or the other, that would be resolved by just a little bit more education, a little bit more homework on what those things could look like. What's interesting though about high asset cases is what I found is when we do the right things with the professionals, bring in forensic accountants, have somebody breaking it down, sometimes those cases are actually a little bit easier to settle. When cases have sometimes very little assets and there's a lot of debt, sometimes those actually end up having a bit more fights because there's just not a lot to go around. And so then people get really like worried about their future and their safety because they don't have enough and there's not enough to go around. And sometimes that becomes a little bit harder. But a lot of my wealthier clients is it's kind of like, okay, yep, let's figure out the nuts and bolts of this. Let's figure out what the division's supposed to look like. Makes sense. Let's get an agreement and let's get it done. And so that sometimes does make it a little bit easier. Though when you have other complicated things like you're involving some prenups or you're involving complicated, irrevocable trusts, gifts, when especially we're talking about millions of dollars, those things get pretty sticky. And again, why having a forensic accountant, having an attorney that really understands those assets is helpful to make sure things actually get divided fairly.
So when you're doing that, so do you advise on prenups as well?
Oh, yeah, everybody should do a prenup.
Oh, really? Everybody should do a prenup.
Well, it's funny. There's a really famous divorce attorney out there. I don't
Because
remember.
some people, they say, you want me to sign a prenup? You must not really love me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really famous divorce attorney out there. I can't remember his name, but he's been on a number of podcasts lately, and I actually totally agree with him what he said. It was a really unique perspective. He's like, everybody does one. You either choose to do one and create the terms you want, or you accept what the state you're in says your prenup is because they say what the division is going to be. And that could change at any time, and the laws could update, case law, statutes. So you're completely subject to whatever the state you're in decides they want to do. So either way, you're doing one. It's just, are you going to choose to set the terms yourself, or are you going to choose to let the state decide what those terms are going to be? I thought it was a unique perspective. Does it mean that
That is an
everybody
interesting
actually should do
perspective.
one? Probably not. I mean, I don't want to advise somebody to do it that it's going to make their relationship start off terrible. Because I've definitely had that where people come in like, well, we're thinking of doing one, and give them some advice, or I draft it up and they're like, oh man, it was a disaster trying to talk to my future spouse about it. Like, okay, in those situations, like it is what it is. If
Yeah.
you can't do it, you can't do it. You got to be happy. You got to find your happiness. But I did think it was a unique perspective about prenups being either one you choose or one that's forced upon you through the state.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. So let me. I want to talk to you before we run out of time here about your coaching. So you started recently coaching other law firm owners. What's the most common mistake you see firm owners making?
Especially with solos, I think the most common mistake is one of time management. And it sounds simple and it sounds easy, and yet I know so many solo attorneys who just aren't able to manage their time effectively. And it was actually some materials that I came across a number of years ago that I implemented at my last firm that I've carried forward to this firm, and we just do religiously, which is it's called The One Thing. It was a book that was written by Gary Keller. Most people don't necessarily know his name,
Familiar
but they
with
know
it?
Keller Williams. And so Keller Williams is a famous, national real estate company. It's Gary Keller of Keller Williams. And he talks there about time blocking. So you figure out what your one thing is, what your most important thing is, and every single day you block out 3 to 4 hours to do that one thing that's the most important thing. And what I've found is that solo attorneys, especially who are struggling to make the income they want to make because they get bogged down with a bunch of administrative stuff and non-billable stuff, they don't manage their time and they don't time block. And if they would just do that one thing, time block every single day to do the most important thing, which, especially if they're struggling to be productive, is billing, almost always going to be the case. If they would just do that on a daily basis for 4 hours, they'd make the income they wanted to make. They'd have the lifestyle they want to have. And so time management to me is the number one thing that solos could change or update to get to where they want to go if they're not making the income they want to have. Now, once they are, and they're just overwhelmed and working too many hours, then there's different problems. But for those that are struggling, that's what I've found in talking with a lot of attorneys is the number one thing.
So how did that evolve into doing the coaching? Was there one person who approached you and said, Hey Ryan, I am so screwed up. I can't seem to get anything done. Was that how it started?
I would say no. Actually, I think
Okay.
it really started because I had the business coach. When I decided to start my own firm, I joined a chamber of commerce here in my area, and they had this program called the Business Accelerator Program, where it was like, okay, like we've got a guy who's going to come and teach you. He's a guy who actually had taught at Harvard previously. He's retired and he's just doing this because he loves teaching people. So I joined this class,
Mhm.
and it was just terrific to have somebody break things down in a way that I hadn't seen things before. That actually was outside of law. He didn't do law. And so it was helpful to take what I know about law and what he knew about business and help marry those things. And I did his program, and it was, I think, a 4 month program. And then I hired him as my business coach afterwards. And so I saw the value in having somebody who could give a different perspective, who could also, give me some accountability, think through things with me, and how that helped me to move things forward sooner. And then I hired another business coach after that that helped me do some additional things, and then another one after that. So I actually still have a business coach. And so seeing how business coaches help me along the path, I thought, oh, there's so many lessons that I've learned from doing things sometimes wrong and messing up, and sometimes getting things right, and also from these other coaches that I have, that I felt like, oh, I feel like there's information that I could share. And it also, Zane, it actually probably comes from, I've got teaching in my blood. My dad was an elementary school teacher for more than 40 years. My sister's an elementary school teacher. I've always had teaching in my blood. I would have been a teacher if I hadn't become an attorney. And so business coaching is another opportunity to teach, which I just love. There's something so fun about sharing something with somebody, talking through things with them, having those light bulb moments where suddenly something they hadn't thought about before, like, oh my goodness, I can do this different, or I can find this way to improve what I'm doing. And so I think that's kind of the evolution of why I decided, like, okay, I really want to try doing this business coaching thing.
So where do you want RCG Law Group to be in a year or 5 years, or what do you see your future? What would you like to have happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually one of the things that one of my business coaches shared with me to do, which we also teach our coaching clients, which is to create a vivid vision, we call it, right? Where we map out the next 3 years. So we know very specifically what our goals are for the next 3 years. So our goal in 2026 is a $6 million revenue firm. In 2027, it's 12. In 2028, it's 20. So we say in our vivid vision that we do at the beginning of every year and update it is we want to be a $20 million law firm. And we want to be a regional law firm by 2028 as well. So we currently have 4 offices in the state of Utah. So our primary office is in South Jordan, but for people who aren't familiar with Utah, it's basically Salt Lake City. And then we're also in southern Utah, is one of our locations, and then central Utah, which is like small towns, because my law partner is actually from small town Utah. And so we found a bit of a niche in also appealing to the small towns because with things just like we're doing right now, where you can do things remote, you can have remote meetings, you can have remote hearings, it gives us more of a reach to other places. And so, by 2028, we're also going to expand into Arizona. That's going to be the first state that we go to, hopefully by the end of this year. And then we'd like to be in some other states as well. We're targeting Idaho, Washington, and Oregon.
Terrific. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I had more questions to ask, but we're running out of time. It's always like that.
I'm
So
sure.